Hello YouTube, and welcome back to another episode of Telling Stories. Today on episode 8 we're going to take a look at the film adaptation for Ready Player One, one of my favorite books, and I'm going to give you 3 pros and 3 cons as to what I thought Steven Spielberg did right with the adaptation and where he probably missed the mark. So I use this list to try to weigh out my own feelings on the movie. If you haven't seen it yet, I encourage you to do so. The spoilers will be light. So stick through this intro, put on that Oasis console. I'm Andrew Crabtree, and this is Telling Stories. Welcome back. Thanks guys for sticking through that intro. Today we're going to be taking a look at Steven Spielberg's film adaptation for the movie Ready Player One. And so if you had seen my book review on Ready Player One, you know this is already one of my favorite stories of all time, and it's probably one of the movies I've been looking forward to the most in a really long time. So I started making a pro and cons list to try to figure out how I felt about the adaptation that I actually thought was widely different than the book. A lot of major plot changes, but I tried to keep an open mind and evaluate it individually, completely separate from the book. So, without further ado, let's jump into that pro and cons list, starting with the pros. So one of the things that I think Steven Spielberg did really well in this film was the casting. The casting from Parzival to Artemis to Halliday to Og to H, they're real-life persons, not their avatars, I thought was really good. I thought that Ty Sheridan played a really good Wade Watts, and just really similar to what I thought he looked like in the book. Item number 2 on my pro list was pacing. I thought Spielberg did a really good job of keeping the storytelling quick, and it moved quickly and was very entertaining. So I thought it was paced really well. Good job, item number 2 on my pro list. Alright, so item number 3 on my pro list was the score and the soundtrack. I thought that the orchestral score and the 80s kind of throwback rock and pop music mixed together really well to help tell this amazing story. Now, I didn't actually learn until after the fact, as I was researching this episode, that the score was written and produced by Alan Silvestri, who was also in charge of the score for one of my favorite trilogies of all time, Back to the Future, a project that Steven Spielberg was a producer on.
Welcome to my latest experiment. This is a big one, the one I've been waiting for all my life.
So, very cool tie-in. I thought that the score really contributed. The orchestral swelling was very reminiscent of some 80s movies, and I actually think they pulled some score straight from Back to the Future for certain parts, which I thought was really cool. So the score was absolutely one of the best parts of the movie, and I'm going to let this clip play for just a second so you can hear how awesome it is. Alright, now to the stuff that I didn't like. So this is now going to start my cons list. So we got the 3 pros, and we're going to counterbalance that with the 3 cons. Item number 1 on my con list was the Oasis. So I felt like the Oasis in the movie was over-the-top CGI and cartoonish, and not really an accurate representation of real life, where, you know, my understanding reading the book was that the Oasis was supposed to just be an extension of reality. Item number 2 on my con list were the plot changes. Now, that said, I do think some of them were good. I actually really enjoyed the race scene and how that kind of sped up the plot to help tell the story in film. So aside from the race though, I do think there were some areas where the plot changes really were a bummer, and especially when we look at Parzival and Artemis meeting in real life, Sam and Samantha meeting in real life before the end of the movie. I thought that was one of the best parts about the book, was how it kind of capped off the ending of the book. But probably the biggest bummer of the whole thing was how instead of Parzival sacrificing himself and going into IOI as this kind of sacrifice, Artemis was just captured, and it kind of just changed the whole dynamic of that part of the movie with infiltrating IOI. So plot changes were kind of a mixed bag for me. There were a couple that I agreed with, but on the whole, I think that it really did a disservice to the book. So my third con isn't going to have a nice, clear, concise heading because I don't really know how to describe it in few words. But I think the biggest con on my list, and the place where the film missed the mark on the book in the biggest way, was that it didn't convey the feeling of loneliness and isolation that each of these characters felt in the real world. it may have alluded to it a little bit, but a guy like Parzival was just so desperately lonely and just didn't get any contact hardly at all from family, and his aunt even though he lived in that house for a while. All of these characters lived very intensely isolated, lonely lives in the real world, but yet when you come to the Oasis, they had these really kind of full social lives. I just really thought that was one of the major themes and takeaways from the book that didn't get expressed, if not the major theme of the book, was how people can live these real lives and these digital lives, and how sometimes, the line gets blurred and people have to make sense of what's real and what's digital, and is the digital real? I just feel like that theme never got fully expressed in the movie, and that was disappointing because I thought it was one of the highlights of the book and what really, to me, made the book culturally relevant.
The contest has got to be about connecting with someone, connecting with the world.
So, major changes from the book aside, I think it's a really good film that's definitely worth a watch. And if you're a book purist, just try to watch it for what it is. Don't necessarily try to compare it to the book, because if you do, you're going to be so sorely disappointed in the movie. That is episode 8 of Telling Stories. Thanks for sticking with me to the end. If you haven't subscribed yet, please hit that button. It's just right there. Just subscribe, and my count goes up, and I'm happy. Alright guys, that wraps us up for episode 8 of Telling Stories. Thanks for watching. Come back next week where I'm going to do something a little different, where I'm going to do a 5-point list on what I liked most about the Wizarding World of Harry Potter at Universal Studios Orlando. Took a trip recently, had a blast, so come back, watch that. Otherwise, I'm Andrew Crabtree, and this has been Telling Stories.